Tonight, listen for a strange kind of silence. Somewhere in the dark, a star is missing a sliver of its light. If you could see the absence, like a bite taken from a lantern, you might be looking at a civilization weighing itself against a sun. Welcome to the Kardashev Scale, a ruler not of empires, but of energy. Type 1 turns a whole planet into a single humming organism, storms guided, seasons stabilized, day and night braided into one intelligent grid. Type 2 gathers a star's power with a drifting halo of mirrors and collectors, a Dyson swarm that drinks sunlight like rain. Type 3 tends a galaxy, millions of suns, arranged into an orchestra that plays across 1,000,000 years. But here's the twist that keeps astronomers awake. The brightest civilizations might not shine. They might hide in the cool, where computation is cheap, wrapping their light in clever engineering so that only a soft fingerprint leaks out. Waste heat, the one thing that cannot be perfectly erased. If you stay with me, we'll follow those fingerprints. Over the next chapters, we'll map the quiet climb from our flickering Type 0 beginnings to a world-scale nervous system. We'll stand beside machines that sip a star. We'll nudge the sun with stellar engines and learn why moving a star can be easier than moving a planet. We'll listen for techno signatures, odd transits, infrared glows, engineered nights, and we'll walk the shadowed paths where great cultures vanish, the filters, the traps, the choices to go dim on purpose. So settle in, let the day fall away. This isn't a race up a ladder, it's a meditation on what power is for. By the time the last note fades, you'll know how to read the sky for signs of gardeners, not conquerors, why the universe might be full and still look empty, and what it would take for our little lantern to join the chorus without burning the garden we live in. Breathe. The scale is simple, the story is vast. So let the room grow still, let curiosity soften into wonder. As we set our course, I would love to chart our little midnight fleet, one lantern at a time. Let me know the hour you're drifting tonight, for it lets me draw a quiet map of when the world rests and guide future voyages to arrive as your night begins. And if these journeys bring you ease, a quiet like or a simple subscription will carry this small harbour of calm to others still awake. So, when you're ready, we set out softly to ask, what does it mean to hold a sun gently? Night gathers around the planet like a calm, breathing cloak. From orbit, you would see the continents glitter, thin necklaces of light, rivers of amber along highways, islands of brilliance around cities, and then the great darks where oceans keep their quiet counsel. That glow is not just decoration, it is a signature. It says, somewhere below, a species is learning how to guide energy. A little over half a century ago, a radio astronomer named Nikolai Kardashev proposed a simple, audacious ruler for civilizations. Don't measure them by their myths, their borders, or the stones they lift. Measure them by how much power they can marshal without destroying their home. Type 1 would be a world that runs on the full budget of a planet's weather, oceans and sunlight. Type 2, a civilization that drinks from the well of a single star. Type 3, a culture that has learned to coordinate the light of a galaxy. The numbers behind those ideas are immense, orders of magnitude that turn our biggest power plants into whispering candles. But the spirit of the scale is disarmingly human. It asks, how far can intelligence go in turning chaos into choreography? If you listen with radio ears, the universe is mostly hush. A few pulsars tick steadily. Hydrogen clouds murmur at 21 centimeters. Our own transmitters leak a faint fog of chatter into space. The silence could mean many things. That life is rare, that it tends to bloom and burn out, that it grows wise and chooses to go dim, or simply that we haven't yet tuned ourselves to the right kind of music. Kardashev's scale gives us something to tune for. Not words, not greetings, but consequences. Waste heat, engineered transits, starlight shorn, and redirected by vast, meticulous machines. Even if a culture never says hello, the work it does on the sky might still be legible. Hold in your mind two fires. The first is small and close, a campfire, a hearth, a turbine's hot breath. The second is far and enormous, the steady fusion of the sun, beating out photons that were born in its core long before humans had names for light. Civilization is the art of coupling the first to the second with grace. We learn to store, to rote, to smooth the jolts and the droughts, to aim power where it heals and not where it harms. A grid is not just cables, it is a nervous system. A city is not just buildings, it is a metabolism. A world properly tended can become an organism with circulation, feedback, and care. And yet the scale is not just about more. Energy obeys older laws than ambition. Every watt we use ends somewhere as heat. Every computation leaves a thermal echo. Every grand project must pay the bill to thermodynamics. That inevitability is not our enemy. It is our compass. If we ever hope to read the sky for others, or write our own durable signature into it, we will do so by learning the shapes that power must take when it is handled with restraint and intelligence. The measure of fire is also a measure of wisdom. By some reckonings, we are a Type 0.7 civilization, a species that has mastered a fraction of a planet's riches, enough to light the nights and lift steel into orbit, not enough to guide the weather or stitch day and night into a single, balanced weave. The next steps are not theatrical. They're patient. They look like grids that breathe with the wind and sun, storage that turns noon into midnight, transmission that flows like rivers across continents, fusion that hums without smoke, stewardship that treats climate not as a dice game, but as a dial. Type 1 is not the conquest of Earth, it is the promise to keep it livable. Kardashev's ladder invites daydreams of Dyson swarms and stellar engines, and we will get there. But its first lesson is intimate. Power must be sourced cleanly, moved elegantly, and spent meaningfully. A civilization does not rise by burning brighter for a season. It rises by learning to dim and flare in harmony with the systems that cradle it. Imagine a world stage where storms can be softened without stealing the rain, where deserts bloom without choking rivers, where night skies stay dark enough to keep the Milky Way honest, even as cities below hum with quiet abundance. This is the texture of Type 1. Not louder, but wiser. From there the imagination steps outward. Between a world and a star lies a bridge. Orbital factories, captured asteroids, mirrors that shepherd sunlight, power beamed with precision instead of brute force. The seeds of megastructures do not appear fully grown. They are constellations of small modular minds and machines, incrementally assembled, fail-soft, repairable, reversible. If a Dyson swarm is the poem, then the first line is a single gleaming square of collector foil unfurling like a leaf. It is easy to hear scale of energy and mistake it for scale of domination. The scale says nothing about kindness or art. It does not guarantee justice, wisdom, or joy. That part is on us. What the ruler can offer is perspective, a way to see our moment as a chapter in a much longer book, and to ask whether the plot we are writing has room for those who will read by our light after we are gone. In that sense, the Kardashev Scale is less a scoreboard than a mirror. It reflects the shape of our choices back at us in units we cannot lie to. So we begin here with a quiet vow. To measure a civilization by its fire is to accept a responsibility. To gather power without poisoning the hand that gathers. To shine without blinding. To leave a signature on the sky that says not only we were capable, but we were careful. In the chapters ahead, we'll follow this line outward, from the soft machinery of a living planet to halos that sip a star, from stardrift engines to the dim arithmetic of a galaxy at work. For now, rest in the thought that the path to grand feats begins close to home, with grids that listen, with engines that breathe, with a lantern whose steadying flame warms the garden instead of scorching it. The scale is simple, the story is vast. Our first act is not to reach, but to learn how to hold. If you could hold a ledger for Earth, the first entry would not be coal or oil or wind, it would be sunlight. About 170 trillion watts arrive at the top of the atmosphere, a white gold flood that dwarfs every furnace we've ever lit. Beneath it, winds spin, rivers fall, forests drink, oceans roll heat from equator to pole. Lightning stitches charge through clouds. Tides knead the coast with the moon's slow hand. This is the planet's income statement, the energy budget that makes weather, climate, and life. A Type 1 civilization is not a species that burns brighter. It's a species that learns to read and reconcile that budget. It knows where the heat is and where it has to go. It can move power the way the body moves blood, without shock or starvation, without necrosis at the edges. From orbit, you'd see its signature, not just city lights, but an evenness to how energy is handled. The deserts glitter with mirrors at dawn and rest by twilight. Lines, some buried, some strung across continents, pulse like rivers, not highways, flow adapting to need. On the oceans, floating farms tilt their faces to the sun and fold themselves in storms. High above, a ring of weather sentinels watches the jet stream's moods, feeding a planetary forecast so fine that grids breathe in time with tomorrow's winds. We stand shy of this. On Carl Sagan's gentle extension of Kardashev's ruler, humanity sits around 0.7, impressive in our way. Enough wattage to rewrite a night sky, not yet enough to keep the climate steady while we do it. But all lives here too, in the intimacy of the next moves. Consider storage, lakes that are batteries, 2 reservoirs trading height for electrons, caverns of compressed air that exhale on cue, molten salts that keep the sun's heat after sunset, chemistries in quiet boxes that hum in neighborhoods like friendly fridges. Consider transmission. Long, screaming quiet DC lines that glide from windy plains to still cities with little loss. Superconducting arteries in the densest districts. Laser-sharp power beamed across short gaps where wires make no sense. None of this requires fantasy, only coordination, patience, and the decision to make the grid an instrument rather than a fight. Type 1 is also literacy. It is knowing the difference between whether we can soften and whether we must respect. It is modelling the climate not to bully it, but to stop bullying it. Stabilising the dial we've knocked off kilter. It is pulling carbon back out of the sky with forests, stones, machines, and habits. Easing heat islands, letting rivers meander again where straight lines have broken their breath. It is a promise, whispered into the ledger. We will take what shines freely. We will return what we waste gently. We will keep the garden habitable while we learn to sing. Close your eyes and feel the planet as an organism. Sensors are its skin, buoys tasting salinity and heat, lidars counting leaves, satellites mapping soil moisture like a doctor reads a pulse. The brain is a braided mesh of forecasts and markets, physics and policy, models that don't merely predict demand, but understand why a neighbourhood will breathe harder on a hot night or a cold morning. Reflexes fire in milliseconds, appliances that wait for cheap wind, cars that drink when the grid exhales, buildings that shed or sip heat as if they were alive. This is the texture of Type 1. Feedback everywhere, not as command and control, but as conversation. In such a world, energy is not something you get and use. It is a choreography. Dawn, rooftops wake with light. The grid sighs as batteries catch the first spill. Midday, factories schedule their heaviest work, swaying with the sun. Data centers drift toward cooler nights and colder latitudes in software, not in concrete. Evening. The planet's storage hums, dispatching what the day banked. Neighborhoods glow warm without burning the sky. Night. The winds, steady and uncrowded, take their turn. Coastal turbines call to inland valleys, through quiet DC rivers. The system settles into a breathing rate that will hold until the sun returns. Fusion, too, belongs to Type 1, not as a silver bullet, but as another organ in the body. Tokamaks with their caged, roaring donuts of plasma, stellarators with their baroque magnetic hearts, inertial flashes that learn to repeat like a heartbeat. These are centuries compressed into machines that do what stars do, but small and safe enough to stand beside. When they work, they do not eclipse wind and sun. They make them easier to love because they round the edges of weather and season. Geothermal drills sip deeper into Earth's warmth. Rivers re-engineer their own turbines to let salmon pass without forgetting how to turn a generator. Even nuclear fission is invited to the table, with designs that fail soft instead of hard, that sip rather than gulp, that count safety as energy too. And because we are curious primates who look up, Type 1 is where the first leaves of the Dyson poem unfurl. Modular mirrors in high orbits shepherd glare and shade. Tiny, clever collectors harvest sunlight where the air is too thin to scatter it, beaming it down as gentle microwaves to broad, safe rectennas that look like fields of silver grass. Asteroids become foundries and farms of metals and volatiles, not to loot the sky but to spare the ground. None of it is monolithic. The age of single points of failure ends. The age of constellations, of many small things doing one great thing together, arrives. Power can intoxicate, even when it hums with grace. Type 1 is the first place we can break ourselves, with competence alone. The filter here isn't only scarcity, it's success, without wisdom. When you can cool a city, you might forget to plant its shade. When you can flood a desert with light, you might bleach the night from your children's eyes. When you can borrow from tomorrow's breeze to feed today's appetite, you might stop listening for the wild's slower needs. The planet tamed too harshly stops singing. So Type 1 must cultivate taste. Dark sky corridors return the Milky Way to human eyes, even as streets below remain safe and warm. Offshore farms leave highways open for whales. Data centers take their meals where water is abundant and waste heat can be used, not merely dumped. Carbon removal learns humility. Trees where trees belong, machines where machines do better, rocks given back to rock, not just moved from one column of the ledger to another. Geoengineering, if it is touched at all, is treated like a scalpel in the hands of a surgeon who knows that sometimes the most skillful cut is none. In return for restraint, awe deepens. You begin to notice the quiet triumphs. A storm that would have shattered a grid a century ago now arrives as theatre and leaves as memory. A heat wave takes its shot and finds that homes have learned to remain cool without drinking the future. A valley glows at midnight, but the river beside it still runs cold and quick enough for trout. The planet's metabolism balances, not by chance, but by care, and at the scale of centuries, the atmosphere looks like the vital it is. High, fragile, stable, hospitable enough for stories to survive without the ambient anxiety of a fevered sky. This is also the chapter where culture begins to wear a long timeline comfortably. Infrastructure is designed to be loved, not tolerated. Beauty is not a luxury, it's a maintenance strategy. People care for what they find beautiful, and in Type 1 the grid needs caretakers more than heroes. Education teaches thermodynamics as ethics. Children learn that every watt has a history and a fate. Art makes visible what would otherwise remain abstract. The rivers of power, the exhalation of heat, the heartbeat of a city in winter. And then, because Kardashev's ruler invites the next step by its nature, curiosity turns outward. With the home organism healthy, we can afford to reach. Not in conquest, but in symmetry. The systems that made a planet steady become the seed of systems that can sip a star without scarring it. The humility we learned by nearly ruining our climate becomes the caution that keeps a Dyson swarm from becoming a Dyson shroud. The elegance of many small parts doing one great thing becomes the blueprint for megastructures that grow like reefs, not like walls. Type 1 is the proof that a civilization can grow up, not by shouting louder than its weather, but by harmonizing with it, not by erasing the wild, but by designing alongside it. When we pass this gate, we carry forward a specific kind of pride, the pride of leaving home in good order. That pride will matter. In the chapters to come, we will drink from a sun and, someday, garden a galaxy. But the music that will keep us from turning those feats into catastrophes is learned here on this blue ledger balanced at last. The planet is not an obstacle course, it is a teacher. When we listen well enough to earn Type 1, the stars stop feeling like a dare and start feeling like a conversation we're finally ready to have. Before we can touch the sun with machines, we have to make peace with the thin shell of space wrapped around our world. Low Earth orbit is a narrow harbour. Fill it with junk and the harbour becomes a storm. So the first acts of a Type 1 Plus civilization are housekeeping and choreography. Shepherd satellites that nudge dead hardware into graveyard slots, magnetic nets and ion spray tugs that deorbit shards, traffic lanes that curve like calligraphy so swarms pass without brushing sleeves. From there, we practice gentle motion. Chemical rockets still roar, but most work is done by quiet engines, Hall thrusters, ion drives, solar electric tugs that trade speed for patience and win in the long run. Momentum exchange tethers whirl like twin baton arcs, catching small cargo from the atmosphere's edge and flicking it outward without a drop of propellant. Skyhooks dip their tips down to meet winged vehicles that skim the edge of blue, then lift their noses towards night. An elevator without a tower, a handshake between air and vacuum. Every gram saved on fuel is a gram we can spend on structure, mirrors, radiators, and the slow growth of a bridge that reaches outward in pieces. In this rhythm, launch pads become less like cannons and more like train stations. The planet is no longer a place to escape, it's the anchor point of a logistics ballet. Cryogenic depots idle in orbital shade, sipping boil off into power. Tankers creep along transfer corridors, topping off ships bound for cislunar space. The moon ceases to be a faraway disk and becomes the nearest high ground, a place where dust is resource, not nuisance, where gravity is gentle enough to forgive clumsy first attempts at industry. To build star harvesting machines without scarring Earth, we move heavy industry off-world. The recipe is simple to write and hard to do. Use local dirt to make the tools that make the next tools. Lunar regolith melts into glass and ceramics under concentrated sunlight. Oxides surrender oxygen and metals to electrolysis. Basalt fibers draw from molten rock to weave trusses as strong as steel without the burden of launch. Small rugged robots, dumb as ants, smart as a colony, print pads, habitats, hangar domes. Each factory arrives smaller than the one it will become. It can't replicate itself, not really, but it can copy parts, then integrate what it copies into something larger and more capable. Bootstrapping is less a miracle than 1,000 careful bottlenecks, widened one notch at a time. Asteroids join the workshop. Carbonaceous rocks carry water and organics. Stony ones offer silicates and nickel-iron veins. We wrap rubble piles in foil cocoons, warm them until they sigh out vapour, then condense that breath into tanks. Swarms of micro-refineries crawl and chew, leaving behind sorted grain instead of tailings. Nothing is wasted, because shipping trash home costs more than making beauty in place. We learn a new craftsman's pride, radiators that glow cherry in darkness but never leak, hinges that will work 1 billion times without a whisper, thin film mirrors that unfurl like lily pads, and lock into geometry with the satisfying click of a well-made instrument. Habitats sprout where workers live and where machines prefer to sleep. Lava tubes roofed with regolith, pressurized greenhouses under meter-thick glass, O'Neill cylinders that begin as short, stubby drums and stretch as fabrication catches up with appetite. Agriculture becomes choreography too, red-blue growlite for leaves, sun piped through mirrors for circadian grace, aquaponic loops that turn waste into resource until the word waste feels outdated. In the quiet, we discover that vacuum is a better factory floor for many things: crystal lattices without convection scars, optics polished at angstrom scales, superconductors tuned in baths colder than polar night. A Dyson swarm is not a shell, it's a forest. You do not plant a forest by pouring concrete. You seed it. The first leaves are modest. Solar power satellites, SPS, that gather unscattered sunlight above the atmosphere and send it home as a soft, continuous rain. Microwaves or laser light are aimed with ridiculous care at broad, safe rectennas that sit like silver fields, their power density kept comfortably below midday sun, so birds fly through unbothered and grass still knows how to be grass. The beam shutters in microseconds when it drifts. The satellite goes dark if it loses its place. Fail soft by design. No single point can misbehave loudly. Mirrors follow, sunshades and shepherds. A chain of thin, steerable films settles into orbits where a tiny nudge means a lasting change. They dim a city-sized patch of ocean by 1% at noon in August, relieving heat waves without stealing summer. Elsewhere they brighten winter farms by lengthening morning's shoulder. It is climate as calligraphy, not paint. Little strokes, reversible if hubris gets ahead of evidence. As the orchard thickens, we begin to feed space with space. SPS power lunar night, where 2 weeks of darkness used to mean 2 weeks of idleness. Factories beam power to tugs that would otherwise need large panels. Data centers that prefer hard vacuum and cold radiate their waste into black, sipping from the same light they later throw away as heat. Each new leaflet pays back a bit more of the energy debt needed to grow its siblings, and the thermodynamic signature, the glow that any engineer can't help but leave, becomes visible at small scales, warm infrared lattices drawn in orbit, an aesthetic as honest as wood grain. Bridging world and star isn't just about harvesting, it's about motion. The same arrays that feed rectennas can harden their stare to push gossamer sails. A sheet the size of a lake, shiny as an eyelid, catches photons and inches outward with the patience of lichen. For heavier loads, we trade pure light for hybrid schemes. Beamed power into high-ISP electric thrusters, magnetic sails that bite the solar wind and tack like clever boats, plasma drives that sip propellant and turn it into exhaust veils blue as glacier ice. The inner system becomes a set of transfer gardens, parking orbits, depots, way stations, laid out to exploit gravitational railroads. You don't fight the sun, you lean. Low-thrust spirals carry cargo on timelines measured in months, not minutes, but they arrive fat with mass instead of thin with fuel. Human crews ride faster when they must. Most of the time, they send their hands as fleets of robots and their eyes as telescopes, sharp enough to count pebbles on a shadowed ridge. Out at the Lagrange points, engineering turns philosophical. A sunshade large enough to matter asks us what enough means. A beamer powerful enough to push a sail toward another star asks who gets to steer the beam when Earth rotates and the ocean's horizon steals the line of sight. The answers become part of culture, not just policy, taught alongside orbital mechanics and ethics. A civilization that will one day nudge a star practices first with tools that could bruise a cloud. Power at scale needs taste at scale. We learned in Chapter 2 that beauty is a maintenance strategy. In space, it's also a safety strategy. If the night sky becomes a saturated smear, we do not merely lose romance, we lose our ability to measure the universe. So constellations adopt dark sky protocols. Fewer, smarter, dimmer when they cross observatory views, surfaces blackened to drink sunlight instead of flinging it, coordinated orbits that keep no-fly windows sacred. Debris is taxed like pollution once was. Cleanup is subsidized like clean water once should have been. Insurance markets learn orbital mechanics. Art schools teach wayfinding by stellar drift again, because retaining awe is part of retaining caution. Thermodynamics remains the strictest teacher. Every watt we gather in space and use on Earth still ends as heat somewhere. We distribute that fate. We pipe surplus into chemical bonds, fuels that can be stored for winter or catastrophe. We budget for radiators big enough to glow without boiling their neighbours. We even allow ourselves new luxuries. Cryo-cities that use the cold darkness to host science that needs silence, not noise. Radio quiet zones that protect our ability to listen for whispers older than our species. The bridge to Type 2 is not a single span. It's a delta, many channels carrying many kinds of flow. Some will silt up, some will deepen into true passage. The ore is not only at the far end, where a star's power sings in our wires. It's here, in the way 1,000 modest instruments, tuned and played together, turn a fragile planetary civilization into one that can touch a sun without flinching. The scaffolding is in place, clean orbits, patient engines, off-world foundries, leaves unfurling into a quiet swarm, beams that can push and feed, norms that keep the sky honest. When we set our hands on the next rung, Type 2, we won't be leaping. We'll be stepping from one well-built platform to the next, carrying with us the habit that makes all of this survivable, the refusal to mistake power for permission. Imagine standing in the shade of a mirror the size of a town, watching it unfurl like a silver leaf against the dark. It doesn't make night, it makes order. Around you, thousands of similar leaves drift in precise lanes, each one listening to the whisper of sunlight and magnetic nudges from ion thrusters. Together, they form no shell, no prison for a star, but a migrating forest, a Dyson swarm. The design rule is not build one big thing, it's let a million small things agree. If one leaf fails, the forest stays a forest. If a gust of solar wind pushes, the swarm flexes instead of breaking. Each unit is simple: collector, brain, radiator, attitude control, and a gentle way to speak to its neighbours. Some beam power to where it's needed, down to rectennas on moons and habitats, across cislunar space to factories and tugs, or outward to deep space depots that sip sunlight for ships who never see dawn. Others are mirrors that tend climate, a winter brightened by lengthening morning's shoulder, a summer softened by a 1% dimming at noon over a broiling sea. Elegance is everywhere. Radiators glow faintly in infrared, sketching lacework patterns across the dark. Beams shutter in microseconds if they drift. The swarm carries its own cleanup crews, shepherding debris into safe decay, the way a gardener gathers dry leaves before lighting a lantern. Orbit mechanics turn into choreography. Rings at different inclinations braid together without colliding. Phasing orbits let units trade places like dancers bowing through a set. The swarm doesn't chase maximal capture on day one. It grows like coral, modular, incremental, self-healing. Energy budgets become ecological budgets. Waste heat is as carefully routed as power, because the one proves the other exists. From a distance, you would not see a new star. You would see a temperament, a particular rhythm in how starlight brightens and dims, as if intelligence had taught the day to breathe. Once you can touch a sun without flinching, you can learn to garden it. Star lifting is not robbery, it is pruning. The outer layers of a star are airy, plasma thinned by distance from the core, where fusion truly roars. With magnetic loops and patient mirrors, a civilization can encourage the star to shed a controlled wind, guiding mass toward collection fields, the way a river guide steers water toward a sluice. Sometimes the purpose is materials, helium and trace elements gathered for industry that prefers pure feedstocks and near-perfect vacuum. Sometimes it's life extension, easing the rate at which fuel is spent, tuning the mix so the star burns calmer for longer, the way a careful cook turns a flame down to a steady simmer instead of a rolling boil. The tools look mythic and read like engineering, magnetic nozzles that anchor in the photosphere and rise into space like invisible chimneys, mirror tides that modulate local heating to tease out more wind where the flow is best managed, superconducting toroids that drink the sun's fields and shape them into channels. Every intervention is designed to fail gentle. If a loop snaps, it dissipates, not lashes. If a mirror mispoints, it self-shades and coasts harmlessly home. A culture that learns stellar ecology also learns humility. A star is not a battery, it is a living thermodynamic engine with moods. The swarm and its gardeners tune themselves to those seasons. During quiet years, construction advances. During stormier years, systems fold and hunker, riding out the bright weather. Over long spans, star lifting becomes a conversation with fusion itself. Not command and control, but call and response. The payoff is subtle and profound. Worlds in the star's care gain centuries, then millennia of stable climate. The civilization's industry feeds on sun-born matter instead of mining fragile biospheres to exhaustion. Power stops looking like extraction and starts looking like stewardship at stellar scale. Type 2 is not only about harvesting light, it's about aiming it. The Shkadov thruster is the purest expression of that idea, a vast concave mirror that floats beside the star, catching a fraction of light and reflecting it backward. Photons carry momentum. Redirect enough of them, and the star feels a constant, delicate shove. No louder than the pressure you'd feel from a moth's wing on your fingertip, yet irresistible over millions of years. It is the gentlest engine imaginable. No exhaust, no roar, just a patient asymmetry in radiance that becomes a path through the galaxy. For a civilization that prefers traction over ballet, there are engines with more grip. A Kaplan-style drive uses the star's own breath as propellant. Fields scoop plasma, fusion burns a portion for power, and the rest is thrown as exhaust to make thrust. Think of it as a tug that never runs out of fuel, because its tow is the fuel. The engineering is fierce. Heat management at scales that make continents feel small. Stability in a medium that boils by nature, but the principle is clean. Where the Shkadov nudges, the Caplan pulls. Either way, the sun can be steered, away from a future supernova's tantrum, toward calmer galactic neighborhoods, or on a long, slow drift that keeps habitable worlds in the sweet bands they prefer as the galaxy's tides shift. Plotting such voyages becomes a new astronomy. We map not just stars but their tempers, not just orbits but their futures. We choose lanes that avoid giant molecular clouds, where radiation is harsh and dynamics are unruly. We time passages through spiral arms the way sailors time cyclones. The duration beggars the imagination. Civilizations measure course corrections in the language of grandchildren's grandchildren's grandchildren, yet the feeling is oddly intimate. There is pride in seeing the constellations change because you changed them. There is awe in knowing that the cold streak of our motion through interstellar gas leaves a wake where dust may one day collect into worlds that will read the sky and find our signature, written as a curve. A Type 2 civilization can try to hide, but physics keeps a ledger. Waste heat pushes outward as mid-infrared glow, carefully managed, beautifully patterned, but present. Light curves of the parent star show tiny regular interruptions as collectors cross the face, too orderly for comets, too diverse for planets. Spectra whisper of star lifting, subtle changes in the balance of elements in the photosphere, shifts too steady to be natural whim. Even motion betrays intention, a star whose path and acceleration don't quite fit the gravity of its neighbours, as if a hand were on its small of back. These are the techno signatures astronomers dream about, not a radio greeting, but the footprints of engineering too big to fully erase. Yet ethics scale with power. A swarm can become a shroud if built without taste. A shade can cool a sea and also starve a reef if the hand is clumsy. The right to beam power implies the duty to miss every bird, every ship, every home. The right to nudge a sun implies the obligation to publish your ephemerides so others don't wander into your wake. Culture adapts to the long now. Art migrates to the canvas available. Kilometre-wide kinetic sculptures that use sunlight as paint. Radiator fields patterned like gardens to delight any eye that drifts past. Quiet observatories preserved like wilderness, because knowing what is remains sacred even as we excel at shaping what could be. Maintenance becomes religion. In the good sense, children learn not only myths of origin, but myths of upkeep. The year the swarm rode out 1,000 flares without a casualty. The day a mirror learned to fold itself when a dust storm from a cometary tail struck without warning. People keep calendars in stellar cycles, celebrate quiet perihelions and safe aphelions. Notice how the light has a timbre that says the gardeners are at work today. It is awe without noise. It is industry that reads as grace. We can hold a sun gently, ask it for power without cruelty, and even escort it through the galaxy with a pressure no stronger than a thought held for a very long time. In the next chapter, we'll turn from the home fire to the distances between them, messages that cross years like rivers, ships that carry minds and seeds, and the culture of motion in a universe where even light takes its time. Light is quick when you're thinking street to street. It is slow when the map is star to star. 4 years to Alpha Centauri, dozens to the nearest interesting sun-like systems, thousands to sweep the spiral arm. In such a universe, latency becomes landscape. You cannot shout across this ocean. You can only send rivers of meaning and wait for their mouths to find other shores. A Kardashev civilization learns to treat delay like climate. Not a nuisance, a given. Calendars expand. Projects are written in tenses our languages barely hold. Conditional futures braided with remembered intentions. Messages leave like ships under sail. Redundancies stacked like provisions. Error correction codes packed tight. Star ephemerides stamped into the header like the tide tables of an ancient mariner. Somewhere out there, a receiver will unfold your packet like a letter kept dry in wax. Check its signatures and know you are careful. The first trick is to aim well. Lasers whisper along hair-thin beams, X-ray mazes stab through dust, microwave floods take the scenic route when precision isn't worth the pointing cost. The second trick is to forgive well. Forward error correction, interleaving, fountain codes, mathematics that makes messages resilient the way braided rope is stronger than a strand. The third trick is humility. Entanglement cannot phone home faster than light, no matter how romantic the headline. The universe keeps the speed limit. Wise cultures learn to thrive under it. Between stars, you don't build wires, you plant lighthouses. Out past the Kuiper haze, nodes idle at cryogenic calm, their mirrors black as night, their clocks disciplined by the flicker of pulsars. Closer in, gravitational lens relays take stations on the long line that begins approximately 550 astronomical units from each star, the focal range where starlight and any signal can be bent and amplified by gravity's glass. Aim a whisper along that line, and the star does the rest, swelling your murmur into something a receiver can hear across a longer gulf than you could ever afford to bridge with aperture alone. These relays are modest in appetite and vast in patience. They carry traffic like a postal service for civilizations, transit agreements, ephemerides of moving beams, shared time bases. In the halo around many stars, the network knits into a lattice, redundant paths so no single link's eclipse can silence a route. Latency-aware protocols become culture. When a message will take 8 years, you don't ask a question that demands an answer in 9. You version your plans the way software does. You fork your projects with dignity, knowing that divergence is not betrayal, but the geometry of distance. And because astronomy is both map and mirror, the network protects sky dark the way parks protect wilderness. Communication windows avoid observatory lines of sight. Beam spill is taxed as light pollution. Archives of the raw cosmos are kept sacred, so even as we become brilliant signalers, we never forget how to listen for what is not us. Not every message fits in light. Some require mass. Culture builds vehicles in a spectrum from dust mote to cathedral. At the small end, star wisps, meter-scale sails spun from threads thinner than thought, pushed by ground or space-based beamers. Payloads are grams, AI probes that wake only on arrival, instruments that can print their own upgrades from local dust, seed archives that unpack like spores in a terrarium. At 0.2 C, a single kilogram of payload demands on the order of 10 to the 15 joules just for kinetic energy. This is why beamed power and wafer-weight mines matter. You learn to send cleverness, not bulk. Middleweight craft hold a different grammar. Fusion stages that sip deuterium and helium-3, inertial micropulse engines that tick like fast heartbeats, beamed electric ships that convert off-world sunlight into thrust without hauling reactors. There are magsails, superconducting loops that bite the solar wind for departure, and the destination's wind for braking, arriving like a leaf that knows how to tack. There are photogravitational assists, where light pressure and a star's gravity conspire to wrap a sail into orbit without burning a drop of propellant. There are even nuclear pulse concepts, domesticated for space habitats, robust enough to drink the hammer blows as champagne. Rare, loud, useful when nothing else will do. At the grand end, live arcs. Not as fantasies of endless corridors, but as ecologies that close. Gardens stitched to life support so tight that waste becomes an old word. Some carry sleepers in biostasis, if medicine earns that trust. Many carry communities awake because culture is a living algorithm, and hibernation cannot compute a society. Increasingly, the starship is not a hull, but a mind print riding a beam. A compressed, encrypted, redundant description of a people's art, science and selves, meant to be woven back into bodies by machines waiting at the far end. To travel is to become portably reconstructible. Starting is difficult, stopping is exquisite. At relativistic dust speeds, a grain can be a bullet. Ships grow sacrificial whiskers of ice and graphite. The forward whipple veil that ablates instead of shatters. Magnetic bows inflate ahead of the hull, gathering plasma into a gentle cushion. Charged dust deflects, and ion streams part, a river taught to flow around a stone. For probes, magsail breaking into the destination star's wind is clean. Arrive hot, unfurl a superconducting loop, feel the slow, long hand of the heliosphere catch you. Sails that once drank light for acceleration now use it to bleed speed, rolling and reefing as photon pressure and gravity write spirals onto the sky. For heavier craft, aerocapture at a rogue gas giant can turn murderous heat into useful work. Ride the upper air in a plasma sheath and come out tame. Where fuel is king, rendezvous depots pre-positioned by pallets of earlier, smaller missions wait like caches on an alpine climb. Arrival is also diplomacy with physics. Clocks have drifted in different wells of gravity and frames of motion. Timekeeping is reconciled like accounts. Local biology, if it exists, is met with reverence and distance. The first landings stay sterile. The first manufacturing runs happen in vacuum. Even the network pauses to listen before it speaks loudly. You do not bring a chorus into a cathedral and begin with a shout. Perhaps the most radical invention on the road between Type 2 and Type 3 is not a machine. It is a social metabolism that metabolizes delay. Diasporas become normal. To leave is not to sever, it is to enter a relationship measured in light years. Families keep long ledgers, letters to descendants they will not meet, advice intended for a city that does not yet exist, oaths to maintain lighthouses that will guide ships whose keels will be laid by hands unborn. Holidays bloom around launch windows and arrival anniversaries. Lullabies include the names of relay nodes like old sailors sang capes and currents. Ethics keep pace with reach. No seed ship lands where it will extinguish a native light. No beamer fires across a world line that holds a sky. No probe eats an ocean to print a habitat when metals sleep harmless in an asteroid next door. We can becomes the beginning, not the end, of a sentence finished by. And here is how we will remain kind while doing so. Techno signatures shift with this culture of motion. There are glints from vast sails, strobing with a precision comets cannot match. There is beamer leakage, a faint, periodic comb in the spectrum, regular as a heartbeat. There are stars whose paths betray a careful hand, and systems whose waste heat sketches geometry onto the infrared sky. If anyone watches, they will see not conquest, but curation. Traffic that respects silence and engineering that reads as grace. We have learned to send meaning as light and as matter, to start without panic and stop without ruin, to speak across years and accept the answer when it comes like weather. In the next chapter, we will imagine what happens when this patience spans a whole spiral, when gardeners coordinate not a town of suns, but a continent of them, and how a galaxy can be tended without going dark. From far outside the spiral, a Type 3 civilization does not look like a blaze, it looks like composure. The arms still curl with star birth and dust, the bar still breathes, globular clusters still halo the disk like quiet lanterns. What has changed is the rhythm, a faint coordination woven through 100 billion fires. Power and meaning move along a lattice that spans kiloparsecs, yet no single thread is asked to carry the whole song. Dyson forests thicken around productive stars, swarms tuned not to smother the day, but to sip it, while other suns remain deliberately wild, sanctuaries for astronomy and for life that learned to write its own story without us. This is not empire in the old sense. It is ecology at stellar scale. The grid is not a chord, but a constellation of ways. Slow beam relays at the gravitational foci of countless stars form interstellar boulevards. Pulsar-timed clocks knit distant calendars. Cryogenic lighthouses in the dark halo keep time with the galaxy's heartbeat. Where the lanes cross, there are anchorages. Vast freefall foundries and archives colder than winter. Habitats the size of small worlds, spinning inside architectures grown like reefs. Computation migrates outward because physics pays better wages in the cold. On the rim, where starlight thins and the background sky is closer to perfect night, each bit flipped costs a little less heat. Culture follows its own gradients. Art that needs crowds flourishes in bright hubs. Thought that needs silence drifts to the periphery, where the Milky Way looks like a spill of salt. Energy is gathered with restraint and with audacity. Around ordinary suns, Matryoshka-style swarms step power down in nesting layers, each shell drinking the waste of the one inside, until the last radiators glow only a little warmer than the dark, proof that nothing can be used without a trace, and nothing need be wasted without purpose. In dense neighbourhoods, where gravity ties systems tight and dust lies rich, entire associations of stars are gardened together, their swarms phase-locked so beams may skate safely between them without slashing the sky. Then there is the black heart of the galaxy. The central supermassive hole, once only a riddle in radio, becomes a turbine. Magnetic fields thread the hot plasma of an accretion flow. Rotation and field tangle into tap lines. The whole spin pays out power through processes, as calm in their equations as they are ferocious in their spectacle. Jets that once raged at random are collared and quieted, redirected into work that lights no biosphere on fire. Even here, the watchword is fail soft. If a nozzle snaps in the magnetized chaos, the jet unfocuses into harmless haze, not a spear. Over millions of years, the payoff is a civilization that knows how to turn the rarest and deepest wells of the universe into gentle fountains. How to feed cities and ships without strip mining worlds that can still grow forests. Stewardship writes the long plot. Molecular clouds are left to their own weather, except where small nudges avert catastrophe. Supernovae are not silenced because their metals are a galaxy's inheritance. Migration is managed with courtesy. Star systems on crossing courses exchange ephemerides centuries in advance. Beamer windows are posted like lighthouse timetables. Quiet sky is treated as a commons, not a nuisance. On these scales, governance cannot be command, it must be taste. The civilization persists not by central decree, but by norms so old and beautiful that to break them would feel like vandalizing the night. If anyone else is watching, a tended galaxy is legible the way a tended garden is, not through neon declarations, but through pattern. Infrared maps reveal lacework. Temperatures nudge toward uniformity around worked stars, yet never smearing the arm's structure into soup. Light curves of many suns whisper with non-planetary transits, too irregular in depth, too regular in intent. In spectra, the chemical breath of photospheres shifts by millimeters per second over millennia as star lifting trims without gouging. On the rim, computation fields glow barely above the cosmic microwave background, wide and dim like frost, immense thought leaving almost no heat. At the core, the radio voice of the black hole loses its tantrums and gains meter. Bursts that once scattered now cadence into engines you could set a clock by. But the loudest techno signature might be what hasn't happened. The sky is not blanked. The spiral doesn't fade to a sullen ember behind a shroud. Diversity remains. Hot blue nurseries, red cradles of old stars, gas veils, dust lanes. Dark nebulae are still allowed to be dark. This restraint is not aesthetic thrift alone, it is survival wisdom. A galaxy with its curiosity intact can still measure itself. A people who can still see the raw cosmos can still learn. So there are chords older than any monument, no full occlusion of inhabited skies, no beams across living worlds, no mining of biospheres when bare rock lies near, no loud computation in sanctuaries where listening is sacred. Infractions are remembered like eclipses. Penance is measured in generations of upkeep. Time itself becomes the medium. Projects are framed in units that mock dynasty and favour duty. 3 open cluster dispersals, 2-bar rotations, until the Sagittarius stream thins. Stories grow long legs. Children memorise the names of relay nodes the way sailors once sang capes. Anniversaries mark the safe folding of swarms during flare seasons. The quiet restart of the core turbine after a storm of infalling gas. The year a migrating archive reached the far halo and exhaled its learning into the cold. Not all strands are bright. The great filters still stalk the long road. Appetite can outpace taste. Tools can make noise faster than norms can damp it. Success can breed the arrogance that ends a chapter abruptly. Type 3 survives by embedding humility where power collects, in design reviews that include poets and ecologists, in audits that treat waste heat as a moral question, in city plans that guarantee a human can still see the Milky Way with unaided eyes. When they stumble, and they do, they stumble inside scaffolds that catch rather than shatter, because redundancy is not just an engineering stance, it is an ethical one. And so awe deepens. To live under a tended spiral is to know that the lights above you are both wild and watched over, that the warmth in your home may have been born in a controlled whisper from the black throat at the centre, that the book you read tonight crossed 1,000 light years on patient beams, last edited before your nation had a name. You sleep beneath a sky that is honest, not sterile, shaped, not shrouded. You belong to a civilization whose greatest boast is not, we took everything the galaxy had, but we learned to be gentle with everything the galaxy is. We have crossed from harvesting a sun to harmonizing 100 billion of them, from local cleverness to galactic taste. In the next chapter, we'll turn to the quiet places where even gardeners fear to tread, the filters and shadows that may explain a silent sky, and ask how to keep our light without becoming the reason someone else's goes out. The universe may be full of ladders, but some rungs are cracked, some slick with chance, and some are simply not there when you reach for them. The quiet sky forces us to ask where most climbers slip. The early filters hide in chemistry, molecules that learn to copy, copies that learn to err, errors that learn to keep the good and throw away the grief. Life may begin rarely, or often, but stall before cells grow nuclei, before cells learn to cooperate, before nerves write electricity into thought. Later filters are social, minds that can measure a star but cannot measure their temper, economies that can lift towers but cannot lift the poor, appetites that outpace the wisdom to feed them. There is the adolescence trap, an interval where a species owns fire large enough to scorch a planet while still thinking like a camp. Many stories end here, war made clean and quick by cleverness, diseases designed too well, machines optimized for goals no one truly chose, climates pushed past reversible. Some filters are geometry in disguise. The radio window is brief. A young civilization leaks loud, then learns to speak in tight beams and fibre, whispering instead of shouting. The colonization wave might not be a flood at all, but a mist. Slow, cautious, fractured by ethics and distance, more concerned with computing in the cold than with planting flags. Physics rewards patience. Each bit you flip costs less heat the closer your machines get to the background temperature of the universe. So a mature culture migrates outward, away from starlight, to think in near dark. Its signature, a thin frost of infrared on the halo, not a bonfire in the disk. Other filters are choices that look like fears from far away. The dark forest strategy, stay dim because you cannot know the intents of strangers who hear you centuries late. The zoo or park desire, leave young skies untroubled, the way we post quiet signs at nesting beaches. The estivation gamble, sleep on purpose, hoard energy, and wait while the cosmos cools, because computation done 1 trillion years from now is cheaper than any thought today. There are habitats under ice and oceans, with ceilings where radio cannot easily escape, cave ecologies that build inward, their art on stone, their mathematics in heat, no techno signature larger than a hill. The silence, then, stops sounding like emptiness and starts sounding like a sum of small survivals. Many rungs passed, many prudences adopted, many flames kept low. Read this as a mirror. Our near-term filters are not mysteries. We know their names. Biosecurity that thinks in generations, not headlines. Climate that is a dial, not a dare. AI that is aligned not only with a sentence about goals, but with the full lived breadth of what we mean by good. Redundancy everywhere. Food, water, data, medicine, power. No single failure allowed to cascade. Governance that makes tasting your own, thermodynamics, an ethic. Where does this what come from? Where does its heat go? Who pays for the tail of risk? If there is a rung called taste, it may be the one we need most. The habit of choosing the beautiful, not because it pleases the eye, but because it keeps the system easy to love, and therefore easy to maintain. If the sky refuses to shout, learn to read its handwriting. Waste heat is honest. Look for starlight shaved in the visible and repaid in the mid-infrared, not as a smear, but as lace. Temperatures step down through nested swarms, radiators whispering just above the dark. Watch light curves for transits, too irregular for planets, and too regular for comets. Collectors in choreography. Listen for beamer combs, faint periodic teeth in the spectrum from power infrastructure that tries hard not to leak and cannot help it. Track stellar accelerations that do not fit gravity alone. The subtle tell of a Shkadov nudge or a long, slow Caplan pull. In spectra, feel for the steady drift of photospheric chemistry where star lifting trims, not gouges. On cold rims, search for computational auroras, broad dim blankets of heat where nothing natural should be warm. But searching is also a form of speaking. How do we become findable without becoming foolish? One answer is the lighthouse protocol. Signals that are unmistakably artificial, yet harmless by construction. Phase-coded beacons sent through a star's gravitational focus, bright to instruments, dim to biology. Time-standard broadcasts locked to pulsars. So any watcher can align clocks and decode intent. We are measuring, not aiming. Infrared glyphs etched into our own waste heat. Ordered temperature fields patterned like prime spirals, so that even our thermodynamics says person from 1,000 light years away. Publish ephemerides for any high-power beams. Keep radio quiet parks and dark sky sanctuaries sacred. Treat the Milky Way as a commons, where listening is a right. Then design our survival to be legible as kindness. Cities that glow without erasing the stars. Swarms that sip rather than shroud. Networks that root power and meaning with fail-soft as a first principle. Risk budgets that treat a child, a wetland, and a small observatory with the same formal respect we give to a reactor. If we ever pass filters others failed, let the signal we cast not be brightness but composure, a signature that reads as care. None of this guarantees company. The universe owes us no audience, but it improves the odds that if anyone is watching, they will see what we hope to be, a civilization that can hold a flame without burning the book it reads by. And if no one answers yet, our protocols will still have taught us how to live. Resilient, reversible, reverent, curious for a long time. The far future is not a wall, it's a weather report that gets steadily cooler. Expansion stretches the dark until every galaxy outside our gravitational neighborhood slips below the horizon. And what remains is an island of bound stars, our cluster, our last commons. Strategy begins with that geography. We gather gently, not to hoard but to hold, shepherding wayward suns inward over millions of years, star lifting to ease their burn, fusing brown dwarfs and hydrogen scraps into long-lived red embers that can keep a civilization's winters soft for trillions of orbits. We trade spectacle for longevity, choosing hearths that glow for ages over bonfires that brag for a season. Power becomes the art of patience. White dwarfs wear Dyson forests like shawls. Neutron stars hum at the center of careful industries that harvest their winds. Black holes become turbines rather than tombs. The Penrose trick, stealing a sip of spin from a rotating hole, graduates into quiet infrastructure. Blandford, Zanarjek tap lines braid magnetic fields through ion fog and turn the deepest gravity into steady work. Accretion is tamed into a mill. Jets that were once spears become laminar beams aimed where no biosphere sits. Waste heat is stepped down through nested shells until the last radiators glow just above the background. Because every Kelvin you avoid paying today buys thought tomorrow. Computation learns thrift. Landauer's limit is not a rumour. Each erased bit has a thermal price. So logic goes reversible where it can, clocked slowly, error corrected, like a cathedral's accounting. Minds that prefer speed ride local furnaces. Minds that prefer reach migrate outward. Thinking in the cold where each joule buys more cognition. Eastivation isn't a sleep so much as a schedule. Archives wound tight into error-corrected crystals. Selves checkpointed like ships in harbour. Civilizations choosing long pauses, not from despair, but because the cosmos will do more with their thoughts when the sky is a few degrees kinder. We also bank in forms more durable than memory. Energy stored as black hole spin. Momentum salted away in stable, wide binaries whose slow gravitational dance can be harvested later. Matter sorted into chemistries that won't rot under eons of cosmic rays. The long game is a braid, fuel stretched, heat tempered, thought postponed where it pays, lived life kept bright where meaning insists. Strategy here is a kind of courtesy toward your own descendants. Leave them not only power, but options. Endgame plans are engineering, endgame values are navigation. We can arrive in the late eras clever and joyless, or we can carry wonder as a constitutional right. So we codify restraint as culture. We promise our heirs visible heavens wherever it's still honest to keep them. We keep radio quiet sanctuaries and dark sky parks even when stars thin. We write covenants that forbid burning the last wild systems for a brief gain. A civilization that will one day live from hawking glow learns early to count ore as part of the budget. Contact protocols mature into legacy protocols. We etch prime number glyphs into our own waste heat, so even our thermodynamics remains legible. We seed time capsule observatories in deep, cold orbits, self-repairing, self-teaching, so that if memory frays, the sky itself can re-instruct a people in how to listen. We design art that can outlast language, choreographed transits that will still make sense when empires are rumours, pulsar-timed hymns that any future mind can tune a clock by, archives written in redundant substrates, rock, ice, light, because meaning that survives is meaning we can keep promising to each other. Then we rehearse kindness under scarcity. When the common sky becomes a set of rooms, you cannot enlarge justice, matters more, not less. Don't waste the night becomes both sentiment and statute. We treat error budgets like moral documents. We build fail-soft into the bones of cities. We keep redundant ladders for food, water, warmth and medicine, so no single mishap writes an ending. And when at last the calendar turns to the black hole era, we plan closing rituals that are era openings, communities gathered around quiet turbines, reading by photons older than any flag, sending small, careful beacons into an ever-thinning dark that say, simply, we tended. If protons endure, we settle into a very long stride. If they do not, We make peace with endings that are distributions, not cliffs, matter leaking into light, holes sighing their hawking breath, archives migrating outward to think a little more before the page cools to blank. In every scenario, we keep one discipline. We refuse to trade wonder for one more watt. Our last signatures can be composure itself. Infrared lace near absolute zero, precise glints where no comet could dance, a measured silence where noise was possible. The universe does not promise forever, but it offers us a long, generous now if we learn to handle it gently. Endgame strategies are not about escaping night. They're about carrying a lantern whose light is worth having. Small, steady and kind, no matter how far the darkness extends. If the Kardashev Scale were only about more, we would already know the ending. Build bigger engines, raise taller towers, drink deeper from the sun until night is a rumour. But the scale is also a mirror, and the reflection it asks for is composure. The question is not whether we can climb, it is whether we can climb in a way that leaves the ladder standing for those behind us and the garden alive around it. A humane roadmap begins close to the skin. We learn to count like physicists and live like gardeners. Thermodynamic literacy becomes ordinary. Every child can trace a watt from source to sink, say where its heat will sleep, and name the trade it implies. Cities breathe, daylight harvested and stored, demand flexing in rhythm with wind and cloud, roofs that feed the grid at noon and feed birds at dawn. Streets lit warmly without washing the Milky Way from human memory. We treat beauty as preventative maintenance, parks stitched into floodplains, facades that shade like leaves, fixtures that aim light only where eyes need it. This is not luxury. It is the architecture of low-friction care. Power systems adopt the virtues we admire in people: humility, patience, reversibility. A grid that can fail soft can also invite experiment. Storage spreads, from water on hills to salts in tanks to chemistries under floors, so no surprise becomes a crisis. Fusion research matures without being crowned myth or miracle. When it arrives as another organ in the body, not a king. Data centers warm greenhouses. District pipes carry the waste from one craft as the fuel of another. Our first space industry is bootstrapped by constraint. Components grown from local dust. Swarms assembled like coral. Each module honest about its failure modes. Each pointing plan published the way we publish tides. Culture shifts in small durable ways. We tax debris because we've learned to see orbits as rivers that can be clogged. We reward dark sky protocols because a star field is infrastructure for wonder and measurement. Insurance learns orbital mechanics. Zoning learns albedo. Budgets learn to price the future as if it were real. The rule that grows old gracefully is simple, reversible first. Any intervention, on a coast, in a market, around a star, earns trust by demonstrating that it can be undone without screaming. We keep redundancy the way climbers keep ropes, not because we expect to fall, but because dignity likes a net. Beyond the technical, we cultivate time. Institutions adopt calendars that outlive election cycles, climate dials set to centuries, water treaties that think in river lifetimes, beam ephemerides and orbital commons managed with the solemnity of lighthouses. Schools place ethics beside equations and repair beside invention. Can we becomes habitually completed with, how would this feel to someone downstream? And what might the unintended heat do? We embed auditors of awe, ecologists, astronomers, poets, into design reviews, so our signatures read as care. In this way, a sense ceases to be a graph and becomes a style, elegant, legible, kind. We are small, and that is not an insult, it is orientation. Standing under a sky that remembers before our species had a word for story, you can feel the temptation to shout. Radio waves flung in every direction, megastructures built as proof of cleverness. But the universe hears better when we speak in pattern, not volume. The future signature of our civilization can be modest and unmistakable, light curves with the cadence of choreography, waste heat etched in primes, a sun whose motion says someone is guiding with a hand, as light as a thought. Imagine the centuries as chapters, already drafted in pencil. In the near ones, we finish learning to be Type 1 without scarring the place we learned it. Climate steadied, rivers given back their meanders, cities that shine like constellations, but leave the constellations alone. In the middle chapters, the bridge to the star thickens, off-world foundries as quiet as snowfall, leaves of a Dyson forest unfurling without ever becoming a shroud, beams that feed and push, but never cross a living sky. Farther out, we take the sun by the elbow and choose a softer lane through the galaxy, not to flee or conquer, but to give our descendants the kind of weather minds can grow in. None of it is a sprint, all of it is choreography. We will miss steps, we will learn, we will keep the music gentle. And if no one answers, if the quiet remains quiet, even when we've arranged our infrared into poems and our mirrors into manners, then we will have written something rare, a story that justifies itself without applause, a civilization worth belonging to, even in solitude. The scale will still have done its work, not as a scoreboard, but as a teacher of taste. It will have taught us to let power move through our hands without making fists. So keep the image simple. A small lantern in a vast garden. The flame is steady, not harsh. Around it, creatures sleep. Tides turn, stars wheel. We tend the wick. We do not set the hedges on fire to prove we have matches. When the wind rises, the lantern leans but does not go out. When dawn comes, it folds itself and becomes a mirror, returning light to what grows. This is the ascent that matters. Not up, but in, into a maturity that can carry fire for a very long time without burning what it loves. The ruler is simple, the music is vast. We have measured ourselves by our handling of the day and found a path that does not require shouting. If we walk it, our grandchildren can look up from a warm, living world and say, with the confidence of people who know how to keep promises, we learn to be bright without becoming ablaze. Let the night keep what we've kindled. Somewhere out there, a star breathes a little differently, and the sky wears a new, careful pattern. Here on this quiet world, a single small lantern is enough. We've measured power and found that the gentlest hands hold it best. Close your eyes. The spiral turns, the oceans breathe, the continents glow like embers under snow. If you listen, you can hear the future arriving one soft decision at a time. Rest now, Voyager. When you wake, the stars will still be there, and so will the path.